A lot of people come home from trips that were objectively good and feel confused by how little it actually stayed with them. They weren't disappointed in this big dramatic way and not regretful, but just unsettled. Like something should have landed and something should have felt bigger, but it just didn't. And because nothing went wrong, they don't know what to point to. So they turn the confusion inward. They tell themselves they're hard to please, ungrateful, or burned out. They assume maybe travel just doesn't do it for them anymore. Or they decide the solution is escalation, a better destination, a longer stay, or even a more impressive experience that finally delivers what this one didn't. What almost no one considers is that this emptiness isn't a personal failure or a sign that the trip wasn't good enough. It's the predictable result of how travel is currently designed, how people are taught to evaluate experiences, and what they quietly expect travel to fix for them. And linguistically, most people don't realize that good and meaningful are not the same category. They can overlap sometimes, but they are created by entirely different conditions. Modern travel is extremely good at producing good trips, with smooth logistics, beautiful settings, comfort, and enjoyment. But it is far less effective at creating experiences that actually reorganize how someone feels once they're home. A good trip performs well. It delivers what it promised, it moves efficiently, it feels pleasant in the moment. And because those qualities are visible and measurable, they're what people plan around. Hotels, restaurants, activities, and scenery. All of that matters, but none of it actually guarantees meaning. Meaning doesn't come from smoothness. It comes from contact, from authorship, from depth of presence. And those things are rarely designed for because they don't scale neatly and they don't photograph well. One of the biggest mistakes people make when planning travel is starting with outcome instead of capacity. They decide how they want to feel, rested, inspired, connected, and clear, and then they stack experiences they believe should produce that feeling. But feelings don't respond to force, they respond to conditions. When you build a trip around expectation, you subtly turn the experience into something that has to perform. You monitor how it's going, you check whether it's working, and you compare how you feel to how you hoped you'd feel. That monitoring keeps you one step removed from the entire experience itself. This is one reason people often say that trips flew by. Speed isn't only about time. It's about attention never fully settling. And when attention is split between experiencing and evaluating, nothing deepens. Another factor people rarely notice is how externally referenced most travel planning has become. Even when people believe they're choosing intuitively, they're often choosing defensively. They're choosing what makes sense, what's well reviewed, what looks like a good decision from the outside, and what aligns with someone else's version of a great trip. That borrowed logic creates trips that are competent but impersonal. They're well executed, but they're not intimate to who you are. And intimacy is where that true meaning forms. Trips that change people tend to have a very specific fingerprint. They reflect the season someone is actually in, not a fantasy or a past identity they're still trying to live out. When that alignment is missing, the trip can still be enjoyable, but it won't attach to the person in a lasting way. This is why people struggle to articulate what felt off. There's no mistake to name, the experience simply doesn't echo. Another structural issue is how heavily modern travel prioritizes movement, with constant transitions, new inputs, new decisions, and it's even embedded into luxury settings where variety is treated as value. But novelty is shallow by nature. It stimulates without necessarily deepening. And depth requires continuity. Time in one place, time with one feeling, time without constant reorientation. And that kind of continuity often gets edited out of the itineraries because it looks like not doing much. People interrupt their own experience more than they realize. They move on just as something is beginning to open. They leave just as familiarity is forming. And they fill in space because stillness feels unproductive. And then they wonder why nothing stayed. There's also a widespread misunderstanding about when meaning arrives. Many people expect emotional payoff during the trip or immediately afterward. When that doesn't happen, they decide the experience didn't work. But meaning often arrives later, once there's space for reflection and organization. When life resumes at full speed immediately, that process never happens. The experience collapses into fragments, photos, stories, and highlights, saying it was great, and that's where it stops. Another layer that rarely gets named is identity elasticity. On trips, people often gain access to slightly different versions of themselves with less responsibility, less performance, and different rhythms and a different pace. That elasticity feels good, but when the trip ends, there's often no room to bring that version of self back into daily life. And the snapback is immediate. Roles resume, expectations return, and the version of you that existed on the trip feels unavailable again. That loss gets misinterpreted as disappointment in the trip when it's actually grief for a version of self that had more room. And most people never name that. They just plan the next trip. And this is how travel becomes a cycle instead of a catalyst. Trips become emotional punctuation marks rather than experiences that actually change how life feels in between. They create anticipation and contrast, but not continuity. None of this means travel is pointless. It means travel has been asked to do jobs it was never designed to do. A good trip can delight you. It can entertain you. It can give you beautiful memories. But if you are asking it to resolve deeper misalignment, restore a sense of self, or deliver clarity about your life, you are likely to keep coming home empty, no matter how well the trip is executed. The people who stop feeling this emptiness aren't traveling more. They're traveling differently. They're choosing experiences that reflect where they actually are instead of where they think they should want to be. They prioritize depth over breadth, continuity over novelty, and presence over proof. They stop asking whether a trip was good and start asking whether it met them where they are. That shift doesn't require more money or more time. It requires discernment. And discernment is a skill most people were never taught. If you've been feeling this quiet emptiness after trips that look great on paper, there's nothing wrong with you. You are not ungrateful. You are not jaded. You are noticing something important. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it.